Straight from New Jersey and brilliantly restored, WandaVision arrives directly to your televisions. Relive all your favorite moments from Westview and be enraptured by your favorite Marvel couple once again. Their love is so powerful. Best of all, you'll never want to leave. Never want to leave. Want to leave. Want to leave. Hi there, I'm Scott D. Forsythe. I'm still doing the announcer voice. Hi there, I'm Scott D. Forsythe, professional voiceover talent and pop culture enthusiast. Today we're talking about the first property of Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, WandaVision. I'll be going over why I think everybody should watch WandaVision despite the backlog of movies seemingly required to view the show. But first, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back to the show. So first and foremost, WandaVision was a show made for Marvel fans. This is set up in the MCU, and it is for people who have been sticking around through this entire series. I like to call the MCU a series. A lot of people say Cinematic Universe. That's what MCU stands for, Marvel Cinematic Universe. But like, it really is a movie series. You watch these characters grow and these new stories, and even though it may seemingly be unrelated, a lot of times characters come back up and it's important. So like, that's kind of a big tentpole of Marvel, and it's a, you know, one reason why I love the MCU. I won't be talking about it a whole lot on Best of All because I know a lot of people aren't particularly interested in superhero series. But I'll be pointing out the ones that are kind of easy to jump into. And I guess that's where the universe aspect comes into the MCU, where there are stories that can just be watched by themselves and nobody needs any relative information. They don't need to know who Iron Man or Thanos and the Infinity Gauntlet. Like, they don't need to know any of that. They can just sit down and watch a nice, concise story. And that's kind of the point of this episode, is to talk about a show that can be watched by itself. Even though it's made for Marvel fans, like, yes, it is exciting to see characters like Wanda Maximoff and Vision star in their own property. They have been around since 2014, I believe. They were introduced in Age of Ultron. They are classic comic book characters. Wanda is an X-Men, which is a whole other can of worms that, you know, the Avengers have kind of tried to stay away from. And so Wanda has always kind of had 2 feet in both worlds, in the X-Men and the Avengers. So, like, it's always been kind of a tricky subject. And for a lot of people, Wanda and Vision haven't had their due on the big screen yet. They haven't had basically a reason to care about them. These are conversations that I've had with people. This is very general. I like Wanda and Vision. I love the character of Vision. And maybe I should just kind of go into like who these characters are for people who don't know, or maybe need a little bit of a refresher. And this kind of goes into like what the show WandaVision is about. It's hard to talk about the story of WandaVision because the show is a single episodic miniseries that has a mystery element, so you can't really spoil too much about it. But what you need to know is there is this couple named Wanda and Vision. Vision's a robot. He looks like a human. He can transform in and out of a human because he's got all this like magic powers and stuff. It's not magic, but it is magic. It's complicated. But Wanda and Vision live in a idyllic suburban life in a town called Westview. And like, that's the premise. You just kind of watch their life as they grow together as a couple. How did we get there? Well, throughout the Marvel series, Wanda is like this vaguely supernatural character, and she was a good guy, she was a bad guy. No, she was a bad guy, then a good guy, like kind of back and forth, and super, super powerful. causes a lot of destruction, and that's been kind of a lot of big turmoil for her, where Vision is this robot who was created to, again, be a bad guy. He was created for another villain, but he ended up turning out to be good, and he is this kind of embodiment of like virtue, and he's modeled after Thor and a little bit of like what the world would want in a hero. And so he's very stoic, he's very idealistic, very Spock-like in Star Trek. This is the second time I've mentioned Star Trek. I'm not that big of a Star Trek fan. I just find myself talking about it a lot. It's a big piece of pop culture. Yeah, you just have these like interesting characters, and as the series goes on and they start working together as a team and on the Avengers, they start to fall in love. And they kind of have this quirky, quiet romance where they are like two peas in a pod. They are both a little bit misunderstood, a little bit on the outside. Wanda has lost her brother. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but it's kind of important in her character development series. And so she's just kind of looking for a family that she doesn't have. And Vision's kind of doing the same. And he doesn't have a family because he's literally just like born. He's just created. And so they kind of, try to make a family together through themselves. And that's where WandaVision comes into play. And I talked about them having this idyllic suburban life, and that's where the hook of WandaVision comes into. It is a love letter to Americana television. So every episode, it's a 9-episode series, goes in between different decades. So you start out with Dick Van Dyke and a I Love Lucy style, where they really have a live audience and they shoot it in 4:3 ratio, and it looks like a show from the 50s. And then they do it again with the 60s, and they model it after Bewitched, and then the 70s with Brady Bunch, 80s like Full House. They do other ones too, but these are the ones that I'm most familiar with. Then they go into the 2000s, and then the finale goes into the modern day, which then goes into a blockbuster Marvel movie. It's a very creative pitch, and it's a very creative premise. And what's so interesting about it, I've given a lot of facts about the show, but like why I like it is it paints a very interesting picture going forward with what the Marvel movies are going to be. I like Wanda and Vision, but they aren't the most popular characters in the Marvel portfolio. So that the Marvel studio saw this wild pitch and they're like, sure, go ahead, do whatever you want. We don't particularly care, because if it flops, doesn't matter. They could crank out a Hulk movie, a Spider-Man movie, and it's like, let's do a movie with a Thor movie. Like, let's do a movie with characters people really, really like and really, really know, and we'll make our money that way. So WandaVision just has this creative freedom, and the cast and crew. I was rewatching it recently, and I was watching the kind of behind the scenes, the Marvel's Marvel's Assembled, which talks about how they make some of their more recent projects. I actually think all of the Phase 4 projects, that's what they're talking about in this series. And it was neat. There was a lot of interesting tidbits that I didn't know. Like, when you watch it, that this is modeled after like different sitcoms, and this is made to emulate that feel. I didn't realize they use like the same lights, the same visual effects from the 50s and 60s to accomplish all of this. And it even got into a point where it's like the cast and crew. Well, the cast, obviously, because they have to wear their period costumes, but the crew wore period costumes depending on what decade they were in. And then when they had the live audience, set up to mimic what it was like when like Bewitched was on the air. So it's this really interesting and creative project to come out of 10 years of big blockbuster movies that a lot of people see as very formulaic. I disagree with that. I understand where people are coming from, but some people are like, oh, all the Marvel movies are the same. And it's like, if you want to make that argument, that's fine. But you can't say the same with WandaVision. WandaVision is something truly unique and bold. And it's so fascinating to see that And I think it is the perfect tentpole to then branch out for the rest of what Marvel movies can be. They've dabbled with it before, where like some of the Captain America movies are either like a war movie or a like spy thriller. You know, we have heist movies with Ant-Man. Guardians of the Galaxy is like a pop sci-fi movie. It's like they've kind of done different genres before, but not to this extent. And with the success of WandaVision, it's able to, for Marvel to say like, okay, we can do some wild stuff. And then down the line, I mean, Loki was already in production, but that became like this Doctor Who, like multiverse, super bizarre show that was so much fun to watch. And I don't think it would have been a success or have been as fun to watch if it wasn't for WandaVision, because it got fans of Marvel and new fans to experience like, hey, we're in for a new ride. We're in for something different. What's also neat is because it was a true love letter to classic sitcoms, it brought in a whole new demographic to watch Marvel movies. When this was airing, I knew so many families and so many adult couples who just watched the show, never knowing a Marvel movie. They don't know anything about the series. They don't know anything about comics, but they wanted to see it for the idea of that nostalgia of like, oh, I remember Malcolm in the Middle. Like, I want to watch that. I want to watch something emulating that, because it's not a parody. They made it very clear in the behind the scenes thing that it's like, we did not want to do a parody. We wanted to emulate what they were doing. And they used the same shots and they used the same like techniques. It was a very intentional show. With that, it does set up new story events. And I think down the line, we're going to get, when we get our next big Avengers movie, we're going to have stuff that ties into what happened in WandaVision. And we're going to see characters return again, because we know some of their stories haven't finished, but have started in WandaVision. Heck, we're going to see it in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But there is also a little element of restraint where Marvel's just like, this is the show. This is what it's going to be. They had to double down this year and say, we are not doing a season 2 of this show. I don't see how you could. It would be neat if they did, but that was not the point. That was not the premise. They wanted to tell a concise story. And even though the sitcom element might be a gimmick for some people, they work it into the story really, really well. And it's incredibly fascinating, especially as someone who is such a fan like me. Like, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is my favorite film series of all time. Not only that I just grew up with it, I really, really like it as a whole. I think it's genuinely really, really good. And I like, some people are like, it's no surprise. I mean, I like all sorts of types of film and TV and media, but the Marvel series holds a very special place in my heart, and I love to see it change and grow. I am so happy that this series is not doing the same thing over and over again. I don't believe that it does. And Phase 4 is a absolute fact that it's like, we are in for something different going forward with Marvel. And it's like, now we have no idea what to expect. And that is so exciting. And it all stems from WandaVision. But WandaVision can be streamed on Disney Plus. It can only be streamed on Disney Plus. It doesn't look like any of the Disney Plus originals will ever have physical releases. Maybe not ever, but it doesn't look like that's any plan in the future. So you want to watch the show, you got to get Disney Plus, which is a great deal. You should do it. I am not sponsored by that. So there's the what's what on WandaVision. Hopefully you've taken something out of this episode and will give the series a shot. I really like it, obviously, and I think if you just go in blind, you're going to have a fun time. But best of all, you were a listener, and I thank you. And I leave you with one little tagline. What is grief, if not love persevering? A very Shakespearean sounding line that comes from this show. And it's the best. All right. Bye. Best of All was hosted and produced by Scott D. Forsythe, using the song Mia by Rolando Pujadas from the album Canta as our intro and outro theme.